Paloma began to plot a death. She carved a timeline on the wall to record the 165-day countdown. Then she secretly sneaked into her mother's room every day, stealing a sleeping pill each time, wrapping it in a handkerchief, crushing it into powder with a crystal ball, and carefully collecting it into a glass jar. What would you do if you had only 165 days left to live? 12-year-old prodigy Paloma lay in bed, pondering this question. Her memory suddenly flooded back like a burst dam to the dinner table conversation from hours earlier. Adults, including her parents, who claimed to be political elites in the country, rambled on about their insights into international issues. Yet none of them knew the basic fact that Go was invented in China. Paloma found it ironic. Rather than lingering through life like a clueless goldfish trapped in a fishbowl, she decided to chase the stars bravely during her fleeting remaining days. So the girl resolved to document the world she saw and film a movie about why life was so absurd. Paloma's camera first focused on the goldfish at home. It would spend its entire life confined to the bowl, and if no one changed the water, it could even be poisoned by its own waste. So terrifying. A life beyond one's control was terrifying. Paloma began to plot a death. As the doodles on Paloma's wall calendar grew, so did the absurdities she captured on camera about the adult world. For example, her mother, who seemed normal but talked to plants every day and suffered from depression, a gentleman who appeared refined but took off his shoes under the table, a guest who praised her mother's cooking one second and then fed the food to the cat the next. One day, as she squatted on the ground trying to film the body of a neighbor who had died of a heart attack the night before, a cat suddenly entered her frame. It was the apartment manager's lost cat. The kind-hearted Paloma immediately stopped filming, picked up the somewhat arrogant little cat, and took it to the apartment manager, Helene's dormitory. There, she saw a book lying open on the table. Paloma immediately aimed her camera at the book. She realized that she might have accidentally glimpsed another side of Helene, who was not the obese, unattractive widow in her 50s that everyone thought she was, living a monotonous and repetitive life. Instead, she likely had a secret but rich spiritual world. From that day on, Paloma's camera focused on the apartment manager, trying to uncover and decode more of her secrets. In Helene's life, which seemed unchanged, she distributed mail, cleaned the apartment, boiled water, made tea, and took care of the cat at fixed times every day. And most importantly, she read books. Whenever she had free time, Helene would immerse herself in her spiritual world through reading. Then one day, a new tenant's arrival disrupted this tranquility. As usual, Helene handed the apartment key to the tenant and was about to leave when Mr. Grand asked her about the previous tenant.
Vous connaissez bien la famille Artens?
Des gens extraordinaires.
Toutes les familles heureuses se ressemblent.
Mais les familles malheureuses le sont chacune à leur façon.
Helene suddenly paused, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She didn't expect that someone in this apartment could understand her so quickly. After Mr. Grand left, she closed the door in a daze and continued to the inner room, which was her private spiritual space. She took down Anna Karenina from the bookshelf, turned to her favorite page, and couldn't help but read the sentences she had just spoken with Mr. Grand. It felt like her soul had been struck. They might have been well suited to become confidants, sharing and exchanging their reading lists. But Helene soon came to her senses. As an apartment manager and a wealthy Japanese gentleman, they should not have any other intersections in terms of wealth or social status. Helene reminded herself to stay true to her role. Little did she know that the coarse disguise she carefully put on had already been seen through and locked as an object of observation by two perceptive souls. A man who named his cat Lev must have a deeper spiritual pursuit beyond the ordinary. One day, these two perceptive and observant people met in the apartment elevator and became rare confidants because of the resonance of their souls. The mysterious Helene became the subject of their common discussion.
Madame Michel, elle me fait penser à un petit hérisson. À l'extérieur, elle est bardée de piquant, farouchement solitaire et terriblement élégante.
After filming Helene, Paloma came to these conclusions. But she didn't realize that she herself was also a lonely hedgehog, often using her spines to fight against the absurdity and nothingness of the world, only showing her soft belly to those she liked. Mr. Grand gazed out the window at the storm, but his mind was on the girl's description of the female porter. He agreed with her and quietly made a decision. The next morning, when Helene opened her door to start her day, she found a pile of gifts at her doorstep, a hardcover edition of Anna Karenina. Helene loved it, but she always remembered the difference in their social status. So, she planned to write a letter to politely decline Mr. Grand's kindness, saying she couldn't understand it. but she couldn't deceive herself into not being interested. After hesitating for a long time, she finally wrote a thank you note and quietly slipped it into Mr. Grand's mailbox, expressing her appreciation for the book. Helene didn't know why, but she ended up sneaking behind the door to see Mr. Grand's reaction after he received the letter. Perhaps she really wanted to know how he would react. However, her supposedly careful move had long been noticed by the man. This time, Mr. Grand took the initiative to knock on Helene's door and invited her to have dinner with him the next evening. It's just a simple meal among neighbors.
Votre voisin. Mais je suis la concierge.
Il est possible de posséder deux qualités à la fois.
The simple and warm words instantly healed Helene's inferiority complex. She realized that if she refused again, it would be impolite. So, she agreed to be there on time the next day. But at night, during her secret alone time, Helene fell into a state of worry again. Rationality and emotion kept tearing at her mind, making her unable to think calmly. Reluctantly, Helene poured out her troubles to a friend, who decisively and efficiently borrowed her a set of suitable evening dresses for the date and reminded her to do an appropriate and elegant hairstyle. You have to dress up when going to someone else's house for dinner. As if pushed by an invisible hand, Helene didn't know how she ended up sitting in the chair of the hair salon, obediently letting the stylist do whatever with her hair. When she looked up at her reflection in the mirror again, she was stunned. She had never imagined that she could look so beautiful and elegant. Time flew by, and soon it was evening. Helene struggled to squeeze herself into the evening dress and then, with a nervous heart, knocked on Mr. Grand's door. Mr. Grand seemed to sense Helene's unease and considerately lifted his trouser leg to remind her to change her shoes. Under the man's gentle care, Helene's originally tense mood finally eased a bit. But as she relaxed, she soon noticed a physical signal she had previously ignored. She needed to use the restroom. A strange thing happened. As soon as Helene sat down on the toilet seat after lifting the lid, Mozart's music immediately started playing in the bathroom. Helene stood up and sat down again in confusion, and the music stopped and started with her movements. It was so wonderful that Helene couldn't help but smile. She couldn't resist investigating the toilet in Mr. Grand's house. As a result, she accidentally pressed some button and ended up getting sprayed in the face with water. What's worse, she couldn't open the bathroom door.
J'arrive pas à ouvrir la porte.
Oh, peut-être tournez-vous le bouton dans le mauvais sens.
J'ai été un peu surprise. Mozart dans les...
C'est une façon japonaise.
Amid Mr. Grand's humorous self-mockery, Helene finally burst into laughter, and the originally awkward and restrained atmosphere was completely swept away. As they enjoyed a relaxed and pleasant dinner, Paloma stood on the edge of the room's balcony. She had not stopped her 165-day death plan and was still looking for more possible ways to carry it out. If she couldn't end the pain, then what was the point of dying? Paloma once again aimed her camera at the goldfish in the fishbowl and decided to take a gentler approach to help it end its miserable life of confinement and achieve true freedom. This girl walked purposefully to the desk in her bedroom, pulled open the drawer, and took out a stolen sleeping pill. She dropped it into the fishbowl and watched as the poor goldfish swallowed the pill. Then, she efficiently lifted the toilet lid and flushed the goldfish down the drain. Perhaps it was fate. The goldfish that Paloma had flushed down the drain ended up in Helene's toilet. Helene, who was taking a bath, heard a strange noise coming from the toilet. She lifted the lid and saw the struggling goldfish, flapping its tail desperately. Its efforts were not in vain. Helene saw its struggle and its desire to live, so she carefully scooped it out and transferred it to a temporary fishbowl made from a kettle. The lucky little goldfish survived. The next morning, Helene was woken up by a frantic knock on her door. When she groggily opened it, she was met with a barrage of angry words from Paloma's sister. Helene couldn't believe that such a well-behaved girl could have such a rude and aggressive sibling. She rolled her eyes and pointed to the schedule on the door, refusing the unreasonable demand since it wasn't time for work yet. Her sister was furious. When she got home, she quickly realized that the goldfish was missing from the fishbowl.
Paloma! Paloma, qu'est-ce que... Tu ne bouges pas! Paloma, j'aimerais que tu m'expliques ce qui s'est passé avec Hubert. Paloma, qu'est-ce que tu as fait de mon poisson rouge?
Upon learning that her sister had flushed the goldfish down the drain, she was beside herself with rage. But the family was at a loss with how to deal with the reclusive Paloma. So, she punished her sister by making her go to Helene's place to pick up the mail instead. This worked out perfectly for Paloma, who had been struggling to find a way to get close to Helene. With only 9 days left in her 165-day plan, she hadn't found a good opportunity yet. Without hesitation, the girl grabbed her camera and knocked on Helene's door, politely stating her purpose. When she learned there was no mail yet, Paloma still lingered at the door, unwilling to leave. This struck Helene as odd. Perhaps it was the loneliness and longing in the girl's eyes, or maybe it was their similar personalities that drew them together. In any case, Helene broke her usual routine and invited the girl in for tea and chocolate. This gave Paloma the chance to get to know Helene better. They drank tea, ate chocolate, and chatted. Time flew by, and by the time Paloma got up to leave, it was already dark. The two had grown much closer. Helene couldn't believe that her carefully guarded secrets had been seen through by a 12-year-old girl.
Vous avez trouvé la bonne cachette.
Strangely, though, she didn't feel violated. In fact, she felt a sense of relief. When Paloma visited her home for the second time, Helene once again welcomed her in, revealing even more of her hidden self.
Je m'appelle Renée, j'ai 54 ans. Je suis veuve, petite, laide, parfaitement à l'archétype de la concierge d'immeuble et qui regarde interminablement la télévision.
One day, as Paloma's camera was focused on Helene again, Mr. Grand burst in and invited her to dine at a restaurant he particularly liked. Paloma had expected to capture Helene's shy acceptance on film. Instead, Helene not only refused Mr. Grand's invitation but also firmly shut the door. Then she broke down and cried, showing her vulnerable side for the first time in front of someone. But what Paloma felt was not the joy of being trusted, it was heartache. She had no idea what Helene had gone through in her past that had made her so humble and self-deprecating. At that moment, their hug was like two hedgehogs, shedding their prickly exteriors for the first time and revealing their soft undersides to each other in a moment of redemption. They drew strength from each other's warmth. Encouraged by Paloma, Helene finally changed her mind and wrote a new letter to Mr. Grand. If he didn't mind, she would be there on time the next day. Soon, she received a reply from Mr. Grand, along with a new evening dress. Helene was overjoyed. She put on the dress and went to the appointment on time. To her surprise, when she walked out with Mr. Grand's arm linked in hers, they ran into one of the apartment's wealthy ladies, who didn't recognize her at all.
Elle m'a pas reconnue.
C'est parce qu'on ne vous a jamais vu.
René, nous pouvons être amis et même tout ce que nous voulons.
Merci.
Much of our fear comes from the mental limits we set for ourselves. Once we bravely break free from these constraints, we'll find that the world isn't so bad after all. Helene had hidden in her shell for too long. It wasn't until Paloma and Mr. Grand entered her life, offering gentle encouragement and guidance, that she finally learned to shed her humble disguise and enjoy everything that came her way. That night was the happiest moment of Helene's life. She decided to ignore other people's gazes and dare to love. Meanwhile, Paloma lay in bed, staring at the jar of powder for a long time, but she still didn't change her original plan. She doodled the last day of the countdown calendar on the wall. Tomorrow, it would all be over.
Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre, ne restez pas là.
Helene was dead. When Paloma heard the news, she rushed downstairs like a madwoman, only to see Helene being taken away by an ambulance. This time, she no longer had the courage to aim her camera at the deceased. Everything came to an abrupt halt. Was this what death was like? Never seeing the people you loved or the people who loved you again. It turned out that death wasn't fun at all. It was a heart-wrenching tragedy.
Ce qui importe, ce n'est pas de mourir, mais ce qu'on fait au moment où on meurt. René, qu'est-ce que vous faisiez au moment de mourir? Vous étiez prête à aimer.
In the end, Paloma took back the goldfish that Helene had saved. She wouldn't think about death anymore, nor would she become a janitor. She would become a princess, living elegantly like a hedgehog, loving and being loved, just like Helene.